Hi, it's Phil Croshaw again from Passions, and in this episode we welcome back Terry Burwell for part 2. Enjoy. Do you know, one of the things that strikes me when I hear you talk is what in effect appears to me is a real passion for what I guess I would describe grassroots. You know, that a lot of people you talk to, that my dad used to call them glory hunters, when it was always used to be about the big clubs, Manchester, in football terms, Manchester United, Manchester City, and so on and so forth. But you seem to have a real passion for the grassroots side of things. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm hugely privileged to have had enough talent to be able to play at the highest level, you know, as it was at that time. But you know, my friendship group, my peer groups, everything else have been in that grassroots community environment, and I think we have a unique sport. We will never be the national game. That's football's place, and it will remain football's place. But we did position ourselves to the community game, and so grassroots is very much the appeal. Now, don't misread me. I love going to Twickenham. I love all the things that go with it. I've been at the World Cup final, I've been at a Heineken Cup match in Toulouse or wherever. You know, I'm fortunate enough to experience those. But actually, they're no better or no worse than being on the touchline at New Milton watching their third team play against Ellingham and Ringwood thirds, you know, in the pouring rain, just watching a referee do his best to give people an afternoon's sport. And the impact of that and the opportunity that affords means that when I come home, having had my beer, you know, at the club or whatever, and I get home, I'm every bit as satiated and enthused as I would have been if I'd stood on the touchline and said, "Come on, England," or, you know, "Come on Lions," or wherever. You know, that a rugby pitch is a rugby pitch, and it's great to walk past, and that's what's been so challenging in these last few weeks. Okay, you know, England are playing Ireland behind closed doors tomorrow. Yes, I'll use my Amazon Prime subscription to watch that, and at some point in there. But what my DNA is missing is what it always did at a Saturday lunchtime. It says, get in a car and find a rugby pitch and watch some rugby live. Go and have some chat with some people in a bar. Go and chew the cud. Go and do all those things. Go and listen to people's opinions on the touchline and so on and so forth. And come home, you know, really satisfied by that experience. And that I'm missing more than anything. You know, to say you're a bear with a sore head is an understatement. You know, because, you know, ultimately you need to have some goal to fulfil all the things that you're doing off piste, and you know, so we're desperate. So where are we at the, you know, and that's a really good. Let's go back. You know, people are desperate to get out and play contact rugby again. They want to be involved. They want to do what they do, which is get into a physical encounter. But all the evidence suggests that parts of our game, the contact game, the scrummage and maul, you know, without being too technical, clearly are not socially distanced environments, and so therefore, you know, we're likely to return at some point, you know, when we can return with an adapted game which doesn't have some of those flashpoints, and you know, the game's comfortable with that. So we've been needing to try and make sure that we get a game which is familiar, that people can be satisfied with. We've been looking to see how we might put some competitive opportunities for people to play intra-club. At the same time, managing what their facilities are like. Can they get into their facility? Can they use the bar? How is that socially distanced? How many people can go in a changing room? Are the showers still available? Have they checked them for Legionnaires? There's a whole raft of things to try and bring the game back into position. But what we've got out there, and this is when I talked about these volunteers here, it's a hugely resilient community-focused group of people who have mothballed their clubs, have started to do all the right things to get things into place. And so I'm confident that what I'm doing, what I can do, will bring it back. And we're all just desperate to get out and get on and touch on. Our pitches have never been in better condition because there's been nobody on them through all the wet.
Not the mud baths of
Usually for winter we're going to be able to run on grass instead of mud. So it's going to be an interesting time. Yeah, but the grassroots element of that and the involvement in the age grade game and the opportunities that brings about, and seeing young people innovation. But of course now the big, huge explosion of interest. We won the Women's World Cup in 2014, which was a great event. Won that in France, and the women's game has gone from strength to strength and continues to do so. And England are now ranked number 1 as the women's side. They're a fully professional group. But critically down below, girls are finding the joy of rugby football, and the great asset that girls bring to the game is they understand space better than boys. Boys are normally intent on finding contact with each other. And
that's interesting. That's very interesting.
They like to find a bit of space. And what we need is more women coaches to make sure they're not directed by the men coaches that take them back towards the women's game. Because when you watch the women's game and you see it played and you see it flow, it's got some. This is not meant to be patronising. It's got some old-fashioned appeal, in that it's just played. Good friend of mine, Pierre Villepro from France, great French fullback. He coined the phrase "jouer, jouer, jouer," which is obviously play, 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 and that's how I see it. That's how I see them involved, and long may it continue to do so, because they're getting great enthusiasm and enjoyment out of it, and the numbers suggest that it's going up and up, and we're needing to find new ways of making sure that we can facilitate that, because our clubhouses aren't necessarily designed for them, changing facilities, etc., etc. So it's really exciting times.
Sorry, one of the things that I've seen debated quite a bit over the years, and this is probably included in football, but certainly I've seen it debated in rugby, and I'd be interested to get your perspective on it. And that's the whole area of, do you really have to have played the game to be the best coach?
No, not necessarily, and you certainly don't need to have played it at the highest level. There are lots and lots of examples of really good quality coaches that have come through, both in football now, starting to develop, who weren't high-profile players, and that's also true in rugby football. Clearly, game understanding as it's in rugby, because whilst I like to think it's a simple game, I understand that vast majority of people think it's an incredibly complex game, and so therefore coming to those nuances can be quite challenging. And game understanding is critical, but coaching is about people management. It's not necessarily always about the technical side. So many coaches now have a team of people that deal with particular facets of what they do. Even in a club environment, you'll find that people share the load around that, and more often than not, the coach is there to engage, to deal with those personal people skills. To put in place the team spirit, the bonding, the culture, and all the things that go with that. And then I couldn't pretend that I ever knew the dark arts of what was happening in the scrimmage. So I relied on other people to give the best advice and that they could to ensure we became a competent scrummaging team. Because if we weren't competent in that area, we couldn't do the other things we wanted to do. So you find strengths and weaknesses in individuals. So the short answer is no. We can find opportunities for everybody in this environment, but they ultimately follow the core cultural principles of people management, and being good in teamwork and good on respect and good on all the core values of sport and engagement.
Well, leadership's obviously critical, and it would be I think it'd be very remiss of me not to cover leadership, because you've obviously worked with an awful lot of people. Is there anybody you may not want to do this, but is there anybody you would name in terms of all the people you've worked with and around in the sport who stood out as exceptional leaders? And if so, what sort of, and it might be your good self, what sort of skills or what sort of temperament do you tend to see in the best leaders?
Well, I'm going to argue a bit against myself now because undoubtedly the person that I'd put at the top of the tree is my former captain at Leicester, which is Peter Wheeler, who has just stepped down as president of the Rugby Football Union. Here is an amazing journey from somebody who played for a junior club in Kent, going down to become a British Lion, captained England, right through the ranks with Leicester, and then ended up as president of the RFU in World Cup year last year. But Peter was one of the great leaders of our sport, because not only was he a great player in the time that was put together, and he led us through a number of John Player victories and opportunities, but also the things that he did to support the club off the pitch, and in particular the engagement of us as a family club, as we were at Leicester at that time. He opened up the doors that hadn't previously been there, so our wives and our families were very much part of the Leicester way. And of course, he went from there on to become coach of Leicester, and then became chief executive of Leicester. But in that role, he was then a key leader within the development of the professional sport, not just looking at what his own club could do, but looking at where he could influence and help change, in the wider context. Now, some would say that he was doing that to the advantage of Leicester. Well, of course, anybody in those environments is likely to favour to some extent what they're doing. But I now know, looking back, that much of the work that Peter did across that structure. And then why was he good at that? Well, he was always able to laugh at himself. That was the first thing. He was a great after-dinner speaker, but he had a capacity to engage and be involved in a very light-hearted manner. I can remember him standing up in a dinner. Newbury became speaker at the dinner at Newbury, and he said of myself, he said, Cherry is one of those players that when he's out on the pitch, you could barely take your eyes off of him, but I could assure you it's well worth the effort when you did. So it was that sort of line and everything else that engaged him, because he won the audience over there at my expense at that time. But that was there. But also what he had was a huge passion. Again, we go back here. You've got to believe in what it is you're referring to and how you're helping lead. And so him becoming the president of the union was great reward for that passion and that journey along the way. What else did he provide? Well, insight, really clear insight and understanding. I often talk about the fact that you can have the knowledge of what things happen because you can read about it, but you very often don't have the understanding of how things hang together and the direction they must take. And that very much takes me back to one of the subjects I taught was mathematics, and one of the things we always had to actually say, show you're working. How did you put it together, and that becomes quite true and everything else. So that understanding is a critical thing, and Pete was always very good at articulating the whys and the wherefores and the whatevers around things, rather than just saying that's what it is, which is the other side. So I think he took people with him. And as such, that's a key leadership element. I mean, there've been lots and lots of great people along the way. Obviously, Bill Beaumont is leading World Rugby incredibly effectively across there as a colleague and a friend over many years. That's at the higher level. But I have some great people working for me. There's a New Zealander called Evan Crawford, who is an exceptional leader in the coaching sphere. Really changed the ideology and philosophy of some of our coaches. And again, because he was a people person and had great understanding of where he was coming from. And there's some incredible people now. We've got Sue Day, who is currently the finance director at the RFU, just received the MBE for her services to rugby football, and she is a fantastic role model and leader, not just for the women's game, because she exemplifies that, or even the LGBT community, which she also represents fantastically, but because she has a huge interest and passion in the whole sport. So I'm really confident that some great people are still involved in our sport, and we continue to provide them. And then I look at leadership, and go back to our grassroots clubs, and I look to see those clubs that have come through the process in here, and invariably they have got sound leadership at the top of their organisation. So Ollie Bolter over on the Isle of Wight, Stuart Barden at Petersfield, James Jagged at Basingstoke, Steve Benson down at Ellingham and Ringwood. You know, the names. You know, these are people I'm living and breathing with all the time. But they are ensuring their clubs are going to be here for not just the foreseeable future, but for the long-term future. And that's what, and they are providing great leadership in their club environments and their communities.
Fantastic. It would be remiss of me being a northerner not to touch on the rugby league versus rugby union conversation. Have you got any views on that? Because obviously I'm reasonably senior in years, and I remember lots of debate when I was at school about union versus league. And of course, being up in Manchester, it was all about league, but it always seemed that I perceived it that the south was union and the north was league. Is that a perception? And what views do you have on the two different types of rugby?
Well, first of all, you know, rugby league is a great spectacle, and it's great. It's great entertainment. It's a different sport, obviously, for various reasons. And you know, I was privileged in 1998 to be in Huddersfield when we went to the George there to look and bring the codes together when because it was at the George in Huddersfield where rugby league effectively became its schism all those years ago. And they're great sports, and of course they've produced great athletes. Jason Robinson is arguably, you know, the greatest cross-code rugby player ever, if not one of the great rugby union players of all time. And there've been others that have come into the fold and continue to do that. Andy Farrell, who's currently coaching Ireland Rugby Union, was with England, but you know, man of steel, you know, a legend in rugby terms, both there, and of course his son is now captain of England. So great admiration for the sport, and again, community roots. You know, go to Barrow, go to Whitehaven, go out on the extremities in Cumbria. You talk about people talk about the M62, but look at the passion that's still held, you know, out on the Cumbrian Peninsula, and you know that's just as strong today, and you know, there's a place for both codes, and you know, the skills are transferable. You know, the enjoyment of both is together. Clearly, my colleagues in union clubs in the north see league as a threat from time to time. And we do less so in the south. And you know, obviously, London has struggled to get a rugby league side for quite some period of time. So, you know, that's been a challenge. But you know, they've now got a successful team down in France in Perpignan, the Catalan Dragons. But of course, that is a rugby league area. So they play. You know, you go to Carcassonne and around that area, they play Tres, which is 13 aside. So you know, is it an international game? Well, not to the same extent that union is. You know, is it likely to appeal to women in the same way that union does? Possibly not, because you know, again, going back to the fact it is such a immediate contact-based game. You know, that's a terrible generalisation, but you know, apologise if it is, but you know, I think
it is what it is.
Reality. But you know, I've got a lovely story to tell. I mean, both my boys were big rugby league fans. You know, they watched it, and we, in particular, the youngest son Adam was a Wigan fan, and that was a bit glory hunting because Wigan, you know, were the team of the great team, as you'll understand. Anyway, he said, "What would you like to do for your birthday?" He said, "Well, I'd like to go and watch Wigan play." And we couldn't get a ticket at Wigan for love or money, so we drove up to Bradford and watched them play Bradford-Wigan at Odsal and years ago. And fascinating experience for an 8-year-old boy for his birthday out of the south. So here we go. But the words still ring with me, and Adam would talk about it. There's a broad Yorkshire man in front of us who only shouted one thing all game. It was, "Get the boogers on side." And that stayed with us, as you won't imagine. Now, I know we're probably coming out, but it would also be remiss of me if I didn't tell you about my greatest moment brought about through rugby football. And Spencer would want me to tell you about this. We just won the John Player Cup back in 1979, and one of our favourite programmes on a Saturday morning when we were all getting ready to go and play was Tiswas on Saturday morning television. hosted by Lenny Henry. Absolutely, children's entertainment. But of course, we were big kids. We're in that big kid environment. We're off to play again rugby football. We're back into those young. So anyway, we win the cup, and we get invited over to Midlands today on a Monday evening. With the cup. So 2 or 3 of us go over to Midlands today, and they the presenter at the time said, so what's left to do then, guys? You won the cup. And we said, well, the really, really big thing for us is we'd like to be in the cage on Tiswas. So, as an ambition, I mean, it's fairly limited, isn't it? And I said, well, what about this Saturday? So the following Saturday, we head off to the studios in Birmingham for the cage in Tiswas. Now, this ended up being the iconic episode with Lenny Henry, where he's got what was then known as the great newsreader alongside him, Trevor McDonald, as he referred to him, but was of course Trevor McDonald there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You've got the 2 newsreaders, Lenny Henry and Trevor McDonald, in front of the cage, and half of Leicester Tigers in the cage behind them, jumping up and down like imbecilic school kids. And every so often it reappears on because it was great. There's no question about that. It's a Lenny Henry great. It's a Trevor, but in the background is these rather big kids in their gear. Does it get any better than that? Of course, no, probably not.
Yeah, I would. Do you know what? I am sure I can find that clip on YouTube. So I might just have a dig around and see if I can find.
I'm sure you will be able to. It's been played millions of times, so it's iconic.
Brilliant. Okay, Terry. Well, we're running out of time, but thank you ever so much for that. Lots of insight and ideas and inspiration, and I just know I could carry on talking to you. We've not even touched some of the stories that you can't tell, or at least you'd have to change the names to protect the guilty. Yeah. We'll have to make that into another show another time, I think.
Indeed, it's been a pleasure, Phil, and I really enjoy talking about our sport, as you know, and I do. The title is the clue's in the title, isn't it? It's passions, and it will remain so. So yes, I look forward to catching up with you again, and thanks very much for the opportunity.
Fabulous. Do you know, I'm just going to finish off with an observation. We all, as part of this journey in looking into passions, one of the debates that goes on is the difference between a passion and an interest. And for the first time, I think, in the interviews I've done so far, something you talked about started to give me an insight into the difference between a passion and an interest. And that was when you talked about the fact that you were just as happy and fulfilled at the side of a pitch in the pouring rain, in the freezing cold in Northampton, as you were at Twickenham, doing all the stuff that you would do at that level. But you were just as happy in both places because it was rugby that was part and parcel of what you were doing. And that's the first time I've come across an example of maybe the difference between the two.
Well, that's really interesting to tell, but I'm glad you picked up on that, because it is such an important part of my life, and my family would share that with me. Carol, I didn't share, but Carol watched her first game of rugby at Roslyn Park. I was come down with Loughborough. She was at college at Avery Hill. And Loughborough were playing Roslyn Park. And one of the great men of Roslyn Park was Oliver Reed. He used to go and have several shares, and he was always on the touchline there. And I brought Carol to her first game there. She thought there were film stars at every place that we went to. I won't say I sold her rugby on that basis, but that's Liverpool. She told her mum, she said, I went to watch Terry play rugby, and Oliver Reed was there. Amazing.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, Terry, thanks very much for that. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. And thanks for joining me on Passions today. Much appreciated, sir.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.